Is Gregory here?
He's in as an attendee.
Oh, okay. So I'll introduce him when we open it up.
Okay, I can quick fix that. Sunny, you can too. Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Oh, okay. All right. Good morning and welcome to the September 13th, 2022 public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We'll begin by taking attendance, and I will turn it over to Mark Silverman to call the roll. Mark?
Sorry, my computer
okay.
just wacky. Okay, Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Devonshire. Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson. He was here earlier.
Here. Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Holford-Smith.
All right, good morning again and welcome to the September 13th public hearing and public meeting. Before we begin, I would just like to introduce to everyone, the commissioners and the public, our new External Affairs Associate, Gregory Kala, who is here today. He will be working with Sonia Gior, our Director of Intergovernmental and Community Affairs, and will be a resource to all of us during the public hearing process. So members of the public should feel free to reach out to him, and commissioners, you all will be interacting with him as we move through our public hearings into the future. So welcome, Gregory. We're happy to have you on board. Next, thanks. Do you want to say hi so everyone can see your face?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say a quick hello. Thank you for having me aboard. It's really been great, and I look forward to working with everybody.
Great. Thanks. Okay, so today we have a very full schedule. We'll be starting the agenda with a proposed designation by the research department. And then we will be moving to our public meeting agenda for applications for work on designated properties that have already had public hearings and are back today with changes. And then we will move to our public hearing agenda. And we will try to stay on schedule. We'll ask all applicants and the public to respect timeframes and respect other speakers by being brief and succinct, and we'll hopefully move the agenda along and stay on schedule for everyone today. And with that, I will turn it over to Caitlin Musmakail, our Director of Research, to start the agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Item number 1 this morning is LP 2663, Julius's Bar Building, 155 to 159 West 10th Street, AKA 186 to 188 Waverly Place, Manhattan, Block 611, Lot 30. The item proposed today for the Commission's calendar is a 19th century former row house in Greenwich Village, which since 1930 has housed Julius's Bar, the scene of significant events in the history of the fight for LGBTQ rights. The Greenwich Village building housing Julius's Bar is one of the city's most significant LGBTQ history sites. In 1966, at a time of rampant discrimination against LGBTQ people, 3 years before the Stonewall Rebellion, the sit-in by members of the Mattachine Society and other events here led to progress in fighting discrimination against LGBTQ people and enabling them to gather openly in New York City. Located at West 10th Street and Waverly Place in the Greenwich Village Historic District, the building is 2 blocks away from the Stonewall Inn, which was designated as an individual landmark in 2015. It was constructed starting in the early 19th century as 3 separate structures that were later combined into a single building. The corner portion containing the main entrance of Julius's Bar at 188 Waverly Place was built in 1826, while the westernmost portion at 159 West 10th Street dates from 1845. Both were raised to their present height in 1874, when the hyphen connecting them may have also been built. Julius's bar this building has housed a bar since 1860s. Julius's itself was founded here in 1930. In 1946, the celebrated newspaper photographer Ouija, Asher Felix, called Julius's, quote, a rendezvous of artists and writers, and the friendliest bar in the village. 9 years later, the Village Voice was founded there. As the village's LGBTQ community shifted from the South Village toward Sheridan Square in the 1950s, gay men started meeting at Julius's despite its management's unwelcoming attitude toward them, mixing in among the bar's mostly straight clientele. Between 1959 and 1966, city authorities used undercover police stings to entrap and arrest gay men and crack down on bars and restaurants serving LGBTQ people. They were aided by the state liquor authority, which routinely revoked the licenses of bars with LGBTQ customers because their mere public presence was considered disorderly at that time. In 1965, the New York branch of the pioneering gay rights organization, the Mattachine Society, elected aggressive new leadership, including Dick Leitch, Craig Rodwell, and Randy Wicker, who were committed to ending this persecution of LGBTQ people so they could gather freely and openly in places of public accommodation. Inspired by the lunch counter sit-ins leading to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Leitch, Rodwell, and Wicker, along with fellow activist John Timmons, organized what came to be called a sip-in. On April 21st, 1966, the four men sat at Julius's bar, ordered drinks, and announced, just as the bartender served them, that they were gay. The bartender's reaction, with his hand covering a glass to refuse them service, was famously captured by a Village Voice photographer. The event was publicized by the Mattachine Society and covered by the New York Times the following day. The issue was soon taken up by the new head of the city's Commission on Human Rights, the former state NAACP head, William H. Booth, who pledged his commitment to ending discrimination against gay New Yorkers. A subsequent court ruling concerning the arrest of a gay customer at Julius's found that the liquor authority could no longer shutter a bar based on the arrest of a single gay patron, and that the presence of gay customers did not, on its own, make an establishment disorderly. These events, centering on Julius's bar, represented a major step toward the equal treatment of LGBTQ people and encouraged the flourishing of gay and lesbian bars as important social spaces in New York City. The building housing Julius's has seen changes since its construction and expansion to its current size in the 19th century. Prior to Julius's opening in the 1920s, the building's facades were stripped and coated with stucco, giving it an English-inspired arts and crafts style appearance, fashionable in Greenwich Village renovations of the time. That appearance was little changed at the time of the 1966 sip-in and the designation of the Greenwich Village Historic District in 1969. Designating the Julius's Bar building as an individual landmark, as with the Stonewall Inn, would recognize its significance to the LGBTQ community and history, and clearly establish the late 1960s as its period of significance. In the staff's evaluation of the building, we believe it has good integrity to that period of significance. Following the discovery of severe structural issues in 1982, the building was essentially reconstructed with the same appearance, a restorative approach that was approved under an LPC certificate of appropriateness. Minor differences include small changes to the bar's window openings, the replacement of patterned brickwork under the first-story windows with stucco, and the addition of a faux cornice on the West 10th Street facade that traced the presumed outline of its original pitched roof. Due to its significance to LGBTQ history, the building was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and that was done by the LGBT Historic Sites Project, who we're very grateful to have worked with and for their advocacy. This building has also been a priority within our own survey and study of LGBTQ history. It remains highly evocative of the legendary sip-in of 1966 and an unofficial landmark of the LGBTQ community, widely recognized and appreciated for the role Julius has played in advancing the rights of gay and lesbian New Yorkers. The research department recommends that the commission vote to calendar the Julius's Bar building as an individual landmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So commissioners, do we have any questions for Kate or the research team? All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So, I just want to note that this is, as Kate mentioned, we have staff working specifically on identifying sites that are significant to the LGBTQ community and heritage in the city. And this has always been one that we have been thinking about, also thinking about the significance of the reconstruction and what that means. We worked very closely with the LGBT Sites History Project, who have been great collaborators. They have been working actively to list sites on the National Register and have worked with us on their priorities. And we have been looking for opportunities where those priorities overlap. And so I do also want to thank them for their advocacy and their partnership on this. And I am, delighted to bring this to us today. And I hope that we can vote to calendar this to have a public hearing in the near future. Commissioner Chapin, would you like to make a motion to calendar it?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Just a moment till I get the,
you just have to make a motion.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I make a motion that this be calendared.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, great. So this is officially calendared and we'll hold a public hearing in the near future this fall. Thank you. All right, we'll now move to the public meeting agenda for the Preservation Department. And I will turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. We'll pause for just a minute to make sure we have our applicants, then I'll begin. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start today's Preservation Department agenda with public meeting items. The first is public meeting item number 1, LPC 22-04647, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 635, lots 33 and 34. It's 105 and 107 Bank Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. It's a Greek Revival style row house built in 1846 and a Greek Revival style row house built in 1846 and later altered. The application is to combine the buildings, construct rooftop and rear yard additions, alter facades, areaways, and the party wall, and excavate the cellars and rear yards. This was last presented at the public meeting of August 2nd, 2022, and no action was taken at that time. We'll turn it over to the applicants to present the revised presentation after we open the proceedings.
Okay, great. And we'll do that right now so that can be seamless. So Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the applicants may speak when they're ready.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Bill Higgins of Higgins Quaysbarth. We're the historic preservation consultants for the 105-107 Bank Street project. And when we showed you the project in August, your comments were specific to issues of visibility, scale, and compatibility of the proposed one-story rooftop addition. We have thought very carefully about your comments and about the design and have made several changes to the proposal that we think are significant. We have increased setback. We have reduced overall volume and footprint. And we have introduced a new stylistic language, which we feel is more in keeping with the kind of evolutionary additions that row houses in the village have had over the years. And namely, that is to think more about the kind of additions that artist studios often involve. These are familiar to all of us in looking at row houses and the changes to them. And we feel that adding this language is something that very much brings our proposal more into line with the character of the buildings, and at the same time allows the restorative and semi-restorative work that we have done to increase the reading of the Greek Revival row, allows that to remain strong. So Gary Brewer of Robert A.M. Stern Architects will take you through the changes.
Great. Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everybody. I'm Gary Brewer. So we have compiled, and we'll go through very quickly, examples of the images that we're talking about. Can you go back, Kate, please? So, Kate, can you go back one, please? So the previous slide shows that there were historic buildings that had additions in the language of artist studios added to them. And then there has recently been additions, here you can see on Horatio Street, that carry on that language. Some of those additions have slanted walls and some of them don't. It's interesting to note that in the slanted wall versions, many of them have horizontal gutters or projections to redirect the water away from the facade. Next, please. And here are a few more examples of sloped and vertical with the wide glazing and lots of windows. Next, please. And then a few other examples. Next, please. So with that in mind, we have made changes to address the comments and the change in the look of the penthouse facing Bank Street. First of all, we have moved the stair, the interior stair, 2 feet towards the garden, which allows us to further reduce its visibility on the street. The pink represents the footprint of the previous design. The blue is what is being proposed. So by pushing it back, it allows us to square off the bay rather than having the octagon and have that bay be in the same plane as 109's face. And then behind that is further setbacks, which you can see that is farther away from the street and 109, with a new bay that has been added at 105 that you'll see in the elevations, also picks up on the artist studio look. Next, please. So here is a comparative scheme that shows the before on the left and the proposed on the right. Next, please. And then rooftop axonometric with the proposed scheme with the bay on the left, and showing on the right how the changes allow the rooftop mass to push farther away from the street and to be at the plane of 109's penthouse or behind it. And you can see the proposed slopes of the 2 window units. Next, please. The street view before and after, and keep in mind from the pedestrian level, when you're directly on Bank Street, you do not see this, but you can see the earlier design and how the new design reduces the sizes of the bays, raises the heads of the openings. And then since you can't put a door in a sloped window, we have tucked in the door in as a blind door in between the 2 bays. Next, please. And then a larger scale, we are still proposing a combination of patinated copper and zinc, which you can see in the samples. We are sort of making certain that we can combine zinc and copper as compatible metals. And then for the upper portions, the overruns and the chimneys, we are proposing a smooth gray stucco that will blend in with the zinc and ideally the sky beyond. Next, please. As we wrap the corner, you can see the proposal on the right with the sloped bay unit, and we have simplified and changed the materials of the side that faces the alley. But again, from the pedestrian level, this is not visible. Next, please. So the before and after from the view on Greenwich Street with the previous scheme on the left and the proposed scheme on the right. Next, please. And slightly closer, so you can see how on the right, the whole massing is calmed down, so to speak, and sets farther away from Bank Street. Next, please. And then a slightly different view that shows 109's penthouse, which is nearly complete, and how the new design on the right has been simplified and is less visible than the scheme on the left. Next, please. And then just a close-up so you can visually compare how the sloped storefront artist studio makes that part of the design less visible in comparison to the bay that was proposed earlier. Next. So then finally, just to go to slide number 20, is on the left is the previous proposed design, which the commissioners were in support of. And on the right shows that at 107 Bank Street, where you push the stair 2 feet towards the garden, how in our perspective, it does not significantly make it more visible. And our perspective is that the visibility of the street is likely the driving factor. So in conclusion, we thank everyone for their time and thoughts as we were guided through this project. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments about the proposed design.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. I do want to just confirm, because we've been focused on these views from the corner at Greenwich Street, that it is not visible from Bank Street when you're standing across from the building or from the other direction. Right? These are the points of visibility, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so from this corner view, you're seeing it also in the context of another recently commission approved addition at 109.
Yes, and if I could just respond, in earlier presentations, we had straight on perspective views from directly across the street and then farther down the street on Bank Street to illustrate that
it's not
from
visible.
those views, it was not visible.
Okay, all right, and this is a somewhat limited window, because if you walked further down Greenwich Street, the corner apartment building would ultimately block the view. And then if you cross the Bank Street on Greenwich, then the other corner building blocks the view. So yeah. There's a sort of a cone here of visibility.
Yeah,
okay.
We are showing from Greenwich the one view where it would be most visible. And as you point out, the other views, it is not visible.
All right, and I just want to note for the record that we did receive letters on the revised proposal from Village Preservation and 21 to 23 Bethune Street Tenants Corp. Opposing the application. And those letters, as always, were made available to the commissioners in advance of today's public meeting. All right, commissioners, if there are no other questions, I think we will move to our discussion. So I'm going to be sending you requests to unmute yourselves so we can begin that discussion. So as you may recall, this proposal included several components, including restoration work on the front facade, additions at the rear and the rooftop addition. And the first time we saw this application in June, we asked the applicants to, we were supportive of returning the building to closer to its Greek revival style on the front, but asked the applicants to study the location of the cornice as it related to the parapet height. We also asked the applicants to reduce the additions and at the rear, at the roof and at the rear, to consider preserving the top floor of 105 Bank Street, which we were not certain was a later addition and concerned that it may be original fabric. And so when the applicants came back to us in August, they had reduced the additions at the rear, proposed retaining the historic top floor of 105 Bank Street, and adjusted the cornice at the front, and had reconfigured the penthouse as well. And at that public meeting in August, the commission was supportive of the work on the front facade and the adjustment to the cornice, as well as the additions, the revised additions at the rear facade, and felt that that work addressed all of our comments. And the one remaining issue was the question of whether they could continue to restudy the rooftop addition to look at its visibility and its typology. And so they have come back today with a proposal that looks both at visibility and typology, and that was just presented. So we'll begin our discussion. Vice Chair Bland, would you like to start this one?
Certainly. Yeah, it's been a long and winding road here for, I think, a very prominent, in the village, prominent two houses now that are going to be combined. So my view is that they've arrived at their happy place, an appropriate pushback of the visibility from the street side, this little cone of visibility, as you've called it, Chair Carroll, has been pushed back in a way that makes it less visible. I don't think it ever was egregiously visible before, but this is a better solution. And even though it's not really very visible to anybody from the public way, it is visible from upper levels of apartments and other houses. The adoption of the artist loft idea seems to make sense to me. So all in all, I can vote today to say this is an appropriate renovation.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson? Has this addressed your concerns?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
The visibility has been reduced considerably, and I think what they did is artfully done. I can approve this.
Commissioner Gustafson.
I had two concerns originally. I believe they were the preservation of that top floor on the rear on 105 and visibility. They solved the first one the first time around, and they solved the second one this time around. So I'm okay with it.
Thanks. Commissioner Shamir Barron.
So while they have reduced the visibility, what I think has happened is that now what is visible, because it's a continuous plane surface, reads like that continuity reads. So what that I think results in is a reading of the combined townhouses. And I think that that's the wrong thing for us to see, even though what we see is minimal and what we see is for a very brief moment. I think that strangely, the previous design, even though I'm not happy with it because it is as visible as it was, because it had the bay, in a strange way, there was some reading that the bay could have been the 107 and the other could have been the other. So I do think that there still is a problem now in terms of what you see, and so I'm not quite there yet on it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Actually, I had the same thought as Adi, but I think maybe that working with the staff, they could there is a break, which is visible between the two buildings slightly. Perhaps the staff could work with them to just the sense of that at the visible part in some way. And in general, I think the minimal visibility at this point, and the fact that it really is much more sympathetic to the language of typical accretions in the village of various, artist studios. I think it really works much better now. So I can approve it, and perhaps they could work with the staff to increase it, make it look a little more obviously two buildings, just right there at the top.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
I agree with Diana.
And Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, same here.
Okay. All right. So what I think we can do today is make a motion to approve this with the modification that they continue to work with staff to introduce an element that creates a distinction and separation at the penthouse, that at the portion that's visible from the public way. So let me go ahead and I will try to make that motion, and then we'll have a vote and see where we are. In the matter of LPC 2204-647, 105 to 107 Bank Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District, a Greek Revival style row house built in 1846 and a Greek Revival style row house built in 1846 and later altered. This is an application to combine buildings, construct rooftop and rear yard additions, alter facades and areaways and the party wall, and excavate the cellars and rear yards. Staff notes that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that, I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. And I also note that the front of facade of 105 Bank Street was altered and the stoop was removed in the mid-20th century, and that 107 Bank Street has a facade easement held by the Trust for Architectural Easements, which has granted conceptual approval for the proposal. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed rooftop addition will only be seen from public thoroughfares within limited views framed by taller buildings in the foreground and often with other rooftop accretions nearby, that within views over secondary facades from Bank and Bethune Streets, only simply designed portions of the rooftop addition will be seen from public thoroughfares and will not call undue attention to themselves or detract from the streetscape. That the rooftop addition will be set back from the front and rear facades, thereby retaining a sense of the building's original scale and massing. That the materials and finishes of the proposed copper and zinc cladding, when seen above the masonry facades and against a background of sky, will help the rooftop addition recede from view. That the angled bays will be evocative of historic studio windows sometimes found at row houses within this historic district. That the mid-20th century alterations to the facade and areaway at 105 Bank Street are not unique, part of a unified redesign, or representative of exceptional details or craftsmanship. Therefore, the proposed removal and modification of these modern elements will not eliminate a significant later alteration. That removing the stucco, modifying the top floor window openings, installing a cornice, and replacing fencing at the front facade and areaway of 105 Bank Street will help return the facade and areaway closer to their historic appearances and support the unity of the row. That the proposed cornice and fencing will closely replicate the historic elements in terms of materials and finish and create a harmonious relationship within the row in terms of their placement and details. That the interchanging of the basement entrance and a window opening at 105 Bank Street will be a discrete modification which will maintain an organization typical of row houses which had their stoops removed in the 20th century. That leveling the existing steeply sloped profile of the side parapet and incorporation of a step will create a simple, typical profile with a harmonious alignment with the front facade parapet and will be consistent with the treatment of secondary facades elsewhere in the historic district. That the existing rear extensions, including their projecting skylights, are simply designed mid-20th century utilitarian structures associated with a former industrial use, which do not reflect the significant historic architectural character of the district. Therefore, the proposed demolition work at the additions will not eliminate any original or significant later alterations. That the conversion of the existing rear yard additions into walled rear yards and their replacement with shallower rear yard additions will help return green space to the block. That the massing of the rear yard additions will be compatible with the various variations in massing of rear yard additions within this block, that the rear yard additions will not rise to the full height of the houses and thereby maintain and retain defining aspects of the building's original scale and massing, that the lowering of the top floor of the rear facade at 105 Bank Street to accommodate a terrace will be largely indiscernible from a public thoroughfare and will maintain consistency in the overall sense of massing of the row. That the rear facades of the end houses in this row feature slightly deeper projections into the rear yards, creating variety. Therefore, the presence of enlarged masonry openings at the top floor at one end of the houses will not detract from unifying aspects of the row. The rear yard additions will feature materials, a solid to void ratio, and level of ornamentation in keeping with such aspects of secondary facades of surrounding properties within this block, that the portion of the rear yard addition at 107 Bank Street will not be visible from a public thoroughfare, that the portion of the rear yard addition at 105 Bank Street will only be partially visible from a public thoroughfare at a distance in an incidental view through a side yard between taller secondary facades, that the extensive removal of party walls will not be perceptible from public thoroughfares through relatively small punched window openings in front facades, that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the buildings or the historic district. However, I recommend that the applicant continue to work in consultation with the staff to revise the details at the front facade of the rooftop addition to create a stronger separation or distinction between the penthouse on 105 and the penthouse on 107 Bank Street. Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Baron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
That's approved with the condition that you continue to work with the staff on the design and details of the penthouse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the next item.
All right, the next item is public meeting item number 2, LPC 22-09131, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 610, Lot 25, 176 to 178 Waverly Place in the Greenwich Village Historic District. This is a pair of Greek Revival style houses built in 1839. And the application is to construct a rooftop addition, replace front doors, excavate the cellar and rear yard, and alter the rear facade. This was last presented at the public hearing of July 19th, 2022, and no action was taken at that time. After we open the proceedings, the staff will do a very brief introduction and then turn it over to the applicant to present the revisions.
Good morning, Commissioners. Timothy Shaw, Preservation staff.
Let's open the proceedings.
Sorry.
Okay, so I was gonna wait until you were done, but we're gonna go ahead and do it now. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. So the applicant may speak after Tim does the introduction. Thank you.
Sorry for jumping the gun there. Good morning, Commissioners. Timothy Shaw, Preservation staff. 176 to 178 Waverly Place are a pair of row houses located on the west side of Waverly Place between West 10th Street and Christopher Streets within the Greenwich Village Historic District. The proposal was previously presented at the public hearing of July 19th, 2022. Here are, I will show the main updates here. At the hearing, the commissioners were supportive of the modifications at the front facade and for the excavation, and most commissioners were supportive of the massing and general design of the rear yard addition, but had concerns with the use of glazed gray brick with the large double height windows at the lower floors of the addition, and with the fenestration pattern on the top floor, including a double height window extending to the rooftop addition, aligned with the plane of the rear facade below. In response, the architect has revised the proposal to include the use of a dark red brick at the rear yard addition, the installation of a 6-inch thick spandrel at the double height windows, and the elimination of the double height window at the top floor, and the use of a more typical fenestration pattern of punched window openings. These are the axonometric views here. The applicant also responded to concerns about the visibility of the rooftop addition by altering the design of the skylight to be less visible from the north. You can see that change to a gabled skylight here. And they added clearer renderings to the addition, clearer renderings of the addition to the presentation. And so they made them a bit larger here, clearer to see. This is a view from the north, a view from a little bit closer, also from the north, and the view from the south. Most commissioners were also concerned with the design of the rooftop addition, which was located at the same plane as the rear facade below, with a small cornice in between. In response, the architect has added a larger cornice. Sorry, here, whoops, jumping around. A heavier cornice here between the rear facade and the rooftop addition. And additionally, is now set back the rooftop addition about 10¼ inches from the plane of the rear facade. Bill Suk, the architect, will now speak further on the treatment of the rear penthouse facade and cornice element.
Good morning, commissioners, and thank you very much for having us back today. Tim, would you mind just flipping to the front elevation, the two facades real quick? So again, as Tim mentioned, you know, on the front facades, you can see on the right-hand side that we've lowered the elevator bulkheads, and we've changed the skylight design to a gable design to significantly reduce the height and visibility. We've also lowered the height of the mechanical equipment, the mechanical bulkhead here. And this has all reduced the visibility and impact of the roof addition from the street. Next slide to the rear photos, please, Tim. So I just want to point out again, the rear photos are just a reminder of the conditions of the extremely altered rear facades, including the, I just want to remind everyone of 176 and 178, where the height and the parapet and the 6 windows going across the top were approved as alterations. So those are not original facade anymore. And there's very little visibility, and there's a parking garage that we are looking at to the rear of us. So as far as any visibility to our rear facade is extremely small. Can we go to the rear renderings? So as Tim mentioned, we've tried very hard to respond to the commissioner's comments from the public hearing, and have responded in the following ways. So we were asked to refer to more original row house materials, volume and materials. We removed the 2-story proposed glass wall at the top, and on the rear facade on the 3rd floor, proposed 4th floors, we modified the design to match the profile and fenestration of the 6 rear window openings of the existing and adjacent buildings. So, and we changed the gray brick to a more traditional red brick. We added a cornice at the top of the brick facade, added a reveal between the rooftop addition and that cornice. And we think we've actually improved the kind of 2-building approach, 2-building concept by making the rear facade more symmetrical. Actually, not more symmetrical, symmetrical. The zinc panels chosen on the top floor completely differentiates itself from the dark red brick. And per the comments, the two lower floors were more specifically delineated with a thicker spandrel across both window openings, aligning with the level of the first floor. Next slide. So here, this is a 3D axonometric showing the much improved visual improvement of the rear facade. Again, just the total disarray of the existing condition right now. I think the proposed ideas are will be a big improvement to that whole block. Next slide. And this is the rendered version comparing what we proposed before. Again, you can see the skylight on the left made it much taller. So that is helping in the height area. We did set back the rear facade of the rooftop addition and delineating it again with the cornice and reveal. Next slide. Again, in the section that shows where we're setting back the rooftop addition. Next. Next. We were asked, there were some comments about the photographs being with all the trees in front of them. We were asked to simulate what the views would be without the trees. Just for kind of, no pun intended, pure transparency. So this is what we came up with. I think the bulkhead is reduced from what we proposed before and minimally visible. And you'd really have to be squinting your eyes, even in the wintertime with the trees and branches in the way. I think the visibility is minimal. Next slide, Tim. Another view showing minimum visibility. We'll point out that there's a large skylight on 182 that's even more forward and taller than our bulkhead. Next slide. One more view, and it's really through a sliver that you'd have to be looking for this. And you can see that tree, even in the winter view, would be extremely tough to see. Next slide. Then these are the changed materials. With the most significantly is the red brick instead of the gray that was originally proposed. We feel that the current existing rear facade is in complete visual disarray and disrepair, and we believe our proposed changes to the design is a vast improvement of what's there now. We appreciate your comments from before and hope you'll receive the revisions kindly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is great, Tim, stay on this slide. So commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicant? Not seeing any questions. We did also receive a letter from Village Preservation also opposing the revised proposal. The last time we saw this, most commissioners asked that the top two floors be restudied, as well as the visibility of the addition from the street. We needed more clarity on that. And some commissioners asked for a spandrel to be introduced in the double height openings at the lower floors of the rear yard additions. So the applicant has introduced that spandrel, provided more information on the visibility, and has restudied the top two floors by setting the addition back 10 inches and no longer having an opening that spans both floors, and creating a distinction with a cornice Applicant has also noted that the rear facade had been raised at some point. And so the line of the rear facade is not in its original height, which I assume would have matched the adjacent row houses, bring closer to it. To address our concerns about additions being too close to the rear facade. That's his response, that it's altered already and that he is using the cornice to create a distinction. So we'll have a discussion about this. And so there really were the three components: the visibility, the spandrel at the double height openings at the lower floors of the rear addition, and the restudying of the top two floors on the rear facade. So we'll begin that discussion. Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you like to start this one?
Yes, I don't think I had as many objections. I'm
you were a little more comfortable with it, yeah.
Yes, right. But I understood other commissioners' concerns. I do think that I think that what they're proposing is acceptable as well. And this kind of addition of a cornice and definition of the two top floors. And, you know, it's not exactly as though it's kind of rendered in a more typical way. It's not really that either. But I can accept this version of it as well, and I'm okay with it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yes, I think most of the changes have responded to the commissioner's concerns that were expressed before, and I think that the cornice will be perceived at a distance as really demarking the the building top, so to speak, the altered building top. So I think I can accept this as presented.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
Can we go back to page 6, the perspective view? Beautiful. See, I disagree that the cornice is enough. I think that this reading shows it pretty clearly that the volume of the original building is subsumed and obscured by the rooftop addition. I think it should be put back at least 3 feet from the front facade, from the rear facade, as is our typical procedure. I also think that the front facade of the rooftop addition needs to have some articulation identifying the two building nature of the facade, even though it is minimally, if not at all, visible. I think that is kind of one of our go-to things, is to try to make sure that when these houses get gobbled up and turned into mansions, that they retain their individuality in form, if not in practice.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Likewise here, I agree with the majority of the commissioners.
Okay, so far we have Commissioner Shamir Barron and Commissioner Chapin supporting the proposal as presented, and Commissioner Goldblum is suggesting that they push the rooftop addition back 3 feet and restudy the design to create a separation between the two sides, or some articulation to create distinction in the two sides.
Yes.
That's what you agree with?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Vice Chair Bland.
Sorry about that. I'm struggling more, I think, than what I've heard so far. I think the issue is the mansion aspect of this. And by just repeating it, even if it's divided into two parts, is not enough for me to separate these two pieces of houses that are now going to be pieces of a house. So I can't accept the whole premise now of the back. They did listen to us. He did, the architect did, responded, I think, very well. But I think my own view of this, that the back should continue to express more significantly different approaches. And it did before. It was just not quite articulate, I didn't think, but at least it separated the two in a more significant way. So I'm afraid I'm I'm not there.
Okay. Commissioner Jefferson?
I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners. I do think that the two buildings look exactly alike. They're symmetrical. I think the cornice is too close. It should be pushed back at least minimum 3 feet. And the original one, page 11, it was the original. If you go to page 11, well, here you can see how close the cornice is. It's only 10¼ inches, almost nothing. I mean, it's not even a foot. But if you go to the original presentation and the new presentation, I don't know what page that is. This one, yeah. In this one, the language of the original one was, was unresolved, really, kind of the materiality of it. The new one is resolved, but then there's the issue of the two buildings. So I'm torn. I'm in between A and B.
Okay, but definitely think that the addition needs to be set back.
Yes,
3
absolutely.
feet. Okay, and some more distinction, if not minor, even rethinking different ways to create some variation, maybe.
Correct.
Okay, Commissioner Gustafson?
Well, I'd love to say I agree with my fellow commissioners, but I think we've had 5 different positions presented, so I'm not sure which one. I definitely agree with Commissioner Goldblum's comments about setting back the top floor. I think, but to reiterate though, I do appreciate that the applicant did a couple of things to try to define the two separate floors, including the fenestration and the cornice. So they made an effort there, but I do think the setback is the real solution to get us to the goal that we try to preserve the massing of the original structure. So I do think it needs to be set back. I also agree with Commissioner Bland on the fact that it really does now appear to be one. There isn't enough distinction for me between the two to define them as two different buildings, left to right.
And okay, so needs more distinction. And I'm just trying to. So I think for Commissioner Goldblum and Chen, I think that the distinction could be they were really thinking more about it at the front. But at the back, one could also break the cornice into 2, as well as setting the rooftop addition back and also articulating something on the front. Or do you think it needs significantly more variation the way that Commissioner Bland was describing?
I think I'm in Commissioner Bland's category here.
Okay. Okay. So with that, I think we would have to bring this back. I don't think we have enough.
Commissioner Goldblum has his hand raised.
Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Goldblum.
Hi, I'm sorry to pile on, but I thought that it might be interesting to look at page 24, I believe it is, in the appendix, the plans, for a moment, and raise a question to our virtual table that may or may not be relevant to the immediate application, which is, over the years, sporadically, when we've looked at building combinations of this nature, next one, sorry, 25. We have looked at the interior structural retention of the center wall to a certain degree sometimes, and maybe not as consistently as we ought to have. But I do want to note that pursuant to Fred's comment, this project, unlike some that we have seen, does go to some significant lengths to erase the center structure of the 2-house volume with its party wall in the center. I personally think that that's a significant modification that we should consider when looking at this kind of thing. But I just wanted to bring it up and throw it out.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we have many times asked for, and we've sort of thought about this center structure in terms of how the public perceives it. And so we have thought, well, if you can look through windows and see that there is an open floor plan and no party wall, then the reading of the building has been altered in a significant way. And so in many cases, we have required either the party wall or something that is the same size, same defining moment as a party wall, but only requires sort of 5 to 8 feet of it to remain, so that if you looked through the windows, you could see something. In other cases, we have found that because the window openings are small enough, you really couldn't see in and discern that there is no party wall structure, and we have not required that it be maintained. And other times, as you said, we've allowed it to be removed without much discussion at all. You know, but I do think where we have required there to be some wall retained in the center, it's been because of how you perceive it from the outside and what you would see through windows. So we can ask them to maybe address that the next time. Okay, so I think we have enough issues that we will not take an action today, and we will ask them instead to work with the staff on a revised proposal that they can bring back to the commission that would set the rooftop addition back from the rear wall, create more variation in the design of the rear yard additions and rooftop additions to create more of a distinction between the two. And then to also speak a little bit about the presence or lack thereof of an element where the party wall would be and how one would perceive that. So we'll take no action, and we'll ask the applicant to continue to work with the staff so that they can come back with a revised proposal that addresses those 3 areas. All right, thank you. And we'll now move to our public hearing agenda.
We actually do have one more public meeting.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Sure, okay. We'll go ahead and start that. It's public meeting item number 3, LPC 23-00830. This is an application for an amendment. It's in the Borough of Brooklyn, block 2112, lot 1, 147 St. Felix Street in the Brooklyn Academy of Music Historic District. Currently a vacant lot, and the application is to amend Certificate of Appropriateness 19-39180 for construction of a new building.
Right, great. And I think I will just also now have us make a motion to open the proceedings so that can happen seamlessly. So Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the applicants may present and
good morning. Should I begin?
Please do.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. All right. Today we're speaking about 147 St. Felix Street. Next. 147 St. Felix Street is in the Brooklyn Academy of Music Historic District. It's on the corner here, on the corner of Hanson Place and St. Felix Street. You can see the green lot. There's no building there in the corner right now. And this was previously before the commission and approved. And we're here today to discuss changes that relate to changing the building from standard construction to modular construction. Next slide. So on the left is the previously approved design, and on the right is our revised design that we're coming to you today with. Much of the building remains the same. It's still a brick facade. It still has a community facility on the corner and two apartments, one in the front and one in the rear. They're both duplex apartments. And the changes that have happened because of the modular construction is the floor levels used to step. There used to be different levels in the heights of the apartments. And now they align to align with the modules of modular construction. So that design change kind of rippled through the design of the building, and the design changes we're presenting today all relate to that changing construction type. So you can see the window designs remain the same, but the changes are the windows align, and then the parapet height has been lowered. It actually is closer in height to the neighboring building. In addition, when the parapet was lowered, there was a loggia at the top of the building in the previous design that's been simplified into a handrail on the right-hand side. Next. So just looking at the elevation side by side, the building still presents itself as a 3-bay row house, which is consistent with its block. And you'll see on the right, the stepping of the windows is regularized and aligns across the building. The window configuration has been reorganized to align with the different rooms inside of the apartments. But the glazing area is actually lower than it was in the previously approved design. Next. So overall, the building has come down roughly 3 or 4 feet from the previous design. And when it came down, you can see there are bulkheads now for access to the roof. Next. Again, the parapet aligns very closely to the neighboring building, and from St. Felix Street, it presents itself as very much similar in keeping with the rest of the row houses on the block. Next. And the clean elevation from Hanson Place. Next. So the view from the corner, the bulkheads are not visible when you're close to the building. There's flue extension on the neighbor's building, which is not visible either. But the look and the feel of the building from the corner really retains a similar presence to its previous design. Next. Just briefly, the program of the building is the same as I mentioned. It's community facility on the ground floor and basement. That's on the left-hand side of the page here. And it's mechanical and garage on the right-hand side. Next. You can see community facility here. Next. And as you move up through the building, there's one apartment in the front and one apartment in the rear. They're both 3 bedrooms and they're both duplexes. Next. And then both of those apartments have access to the roof. There's mechanical equipment that is screened and set back from the street. That is the roof. So just looking closer at the section of the building and where these design changes came from, this is the proposed section with the floors aligning. Next. The previously approved design had steps in each one of these apartments, which you can see in the red lines, and that's the driving factor of these design changes. Next. Looking at the materiality, just from the storefronts up, we're still using the same metal panels and louvers at the community facility entrance. The design of the window surrounds and the fenestration is the same. Even though it's modular construction, the facade is going to be hand-laid brick, so it will be viewed as a traditional construction building. It's not going to look any different than a traditional construction type. And then at the top of the building, the bulkheads are set back and clad with light gray zinc standing seam metal. Same materiality view from Hanson Place. The materials are the same. Looking at the details, the chamfer on the windows that was previously approved is retained. The hand-laid brick facade is what we're proposing. And the detail of the painted metal railing at the top of the building is simplified from the previous loggia design. So hand-laid brick, metal panels around the windows and around the entries, and light gray zinc panels on the bulkheads. Just one more look at the overall view. Next. So we took a look at this, the visibility of the bulkheads. This is the view corridor from Hanson Place. The bulkheads are not visible. Next. From St. Felix Street, directly across the street, the bulkheads are not visible either. Next. But we understand, obviously, you can see the building from further away. So we took a wider view visibility of these bulkheads. So next slide. So first, from further down Hanson Place, you can see the front bulkhead poking above the lowered parapet, but the rear bulkhead is not visible. Next slide. From this view, you can see both the top of both bulkheads poking above the parapet. Just something of note, there are street trees in front of this building, so it will be a little bit softer than this, but we wanted to show the visibility of that massing. Next. And finally, on St. Felix Street, the bulkheads are not visible over the parapet, over the lower parapet. Next. So we're going to end on this slide to show the side-by-side of the previously approved and the revised design. I also have the architect and the modular construction company here as presenters today to answer any specific questions that you have about other parts of the building.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions on this? Yes, Commissioner Chapin, please go ahead.
Yeah, would you just explain the design theory that you have about the way the parapet is broken up? In the previously approved design, there was kind of a sense from the side of the building having, it was one, you know, the windows were spaced, you know, somewhat, I don't know, in a way that created the sense that it was one building. Now you have almost the sense of two buildings back to back and divided in the middle from the way the parapet is broken up. And could you just explain why you chose to have the gaps and parapet in that particular way, what you're trying to achieve, the sense of the design? Thank you.
Sure.
Drew, do you want to go or I respond?
Reza, you can respond.
Sure. So yeah, the notion was that, you know, we were trying to keep the DNA of the original design to some degrees. And, you know, the fact that we had the break between the two, you know, the two masses, you know, with the loggia, we wanted to kind of respond to, you know, that language, you know, to some degrees, you know, but, you know, at the same time, if you know, if the, you know, all commissioners agree that, you know, that is not necessarily, you know, addressing that, we are always open to, you know, go back and, you know, we're going to be fine if we wanted to have a solid parapet.
Thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Jefferson.
Yes. The alignment in plan of your corner building with the building to the left, do they align or your building sticks out further? I'm confused by the perspective.
The face of the building aligns with the neighboring building.
It does. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions. So I think we'll go ahead and move to our discussion. So this is, as has been presented, an application to amend a certificate of appropriateness for a previously approved design, which is shown on the left. And the changes really result in the lowering of the building to align with the heights of the row houses on St. Felix and regularizing the fenestration pattern and the base height and changes to the design of the parapet. And so we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chapin, would you like to start this one?
I think that most of the changes they have made are, you know, very good, and I'm comfortable with the new design. I do think that, as my question suggested, that it doesn't have the sense of a long building so much as two buildings, and what they attempted to do with the parapet, and that just carrying the parapet pretty much across would be more appropriate. But otherwise, I'm fine with the design.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
Yeah, I think this has always been I'm sad to see it back because I thought it was built already, but it was an interesting project. It remains an interesting project. And I think that they've done a good and hard thing with the project. I think the changes have been relatively modest and have improved its relationship with its context. I think that we should take them up on their offer to get rid of the balustraded parapet. I think it's fussy. And I also think that there's a kind of token cornice, because I'm in a historic district thing going on, that I think the building could live without, but that's just the architect and me speaking, not the commissioner.
Okay.
But I generally think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I agree with the commissioner's comment. I think the overall the concern remains the parapet. I think the focus, I guess maybe the comment should be to work with the staff. I do not know what, I'll defer to the rest of the commissioners to see how they feel about the top of the parapet.
Okay, thanks. Vice Chair Bland.
Thank you. I know this block really well. I used to have a very, very close friend who lived right down the row. Years ago, when the entire context, except for this one block, was different, particularly across the street. It was a rat-infested junkyard. And now, of course, it's a hugely developed part of the new Brooklyn. So I too was very interested and followed the design, which didn't come it didn't come easily, as I recall. We worked with the very capable architects here to get it to where it was. You know what? I think it's better. I think it's actually better now. And if it was caused by the modularity issue, so be it, but I think it's better. And I throw my lot with skilled architects here, and if their thoughts are of the parapet the way they've designed it, I'm okay with it. I think we could fuss around with it a bunch, and I'm not sure it would be better. So anyway, that's my thought. I think this is a very good scheme, and I hope it gets built. As Commissioner Goldblum said, I thought it may have already been built. Let's hope it gets built soon.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Yeah, this is such an interesting project. The left-hand image is dramatic. I mean, truly dramatic with the steps moving up. And the quieter one to the right is also powerful in its own soft way, in its static way. So there's drama and then there's quietness. But I do think that what they presented is good. I'm not sure of the amount of openness on the parapet, but that's the architect's prerogative.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, I agree with all of Commissioner Goldblum's comments.
Okay. And Commissioner Shamir Baran?
I think I do too. I don't have anything further to add.
Okay. All right. So I think, conceptually or generally speaking, we are very supportive of this project. We liked it before. We believe that it still has, while regularized, still has some of its original DNA, as the architect said he was hoping for, while actually relating more to the context, perhaps. And so I think this is successful and we're ready to support it today, but there do seem to be more commissioners than not who would like to see the parapet restudied with working with the staff. So we will make a motion to approve with the modification that they continue to restudy that parapet in consultation with the staff. And Commissioner Chapin, would you read that motion?
Sure, thank you. In the matter of LPC 2300830 St. Felix Street, Brooklyn Academy of Music Historic District, Vacant lot application is to amend certificate of appropriateness 1939-180 for construction of a new building. I note that the building became vacant after the demolition of the historic three-story corner building in 1999, following a street collapse at St. Felix Street and Hanson Place. I further note that the streetscape consists predominantly of 3- and 4-story brick row houses, and that the site is on a corner lot at the edge of the historic district, across from a large church inside the district and surrounded by new construction outside the district. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the overall reduced height of the street facades of the proposed building will approximately align with the cornices at the adjacent buildings on St. Felix Street, that the adjusted tripartite bay arrangement of the punched upper floor windows at the St. Felix Street facade will continue to relate to the tripartite punched fenestration found at the adjacent row houses in a contemporary manner, that the horizontally aligned fenestration at the Hanson Place facade is more consistent and harmonious with the typical patterning and alignment at surrounding historic row houses than the staggered windows in the previous design, while the varied window sizes and proportions continue to reflect the variety of building types along Hanson Place, both in and out of the historic district, that the proposed control joints are located only at the Hanson Place facade, are consistent with modern masonry construction and detailing, and are required for the long-term maintenance of the building, that the revised inset niche featuring metal cladding will continue to add variation and serve as a break in the length of the Hudson Street facade, that the increase in visibility of the stair bulkheads featuring standing seam zinc and the new flue extension featuring a matte light gray finish will be seen within the context of taller surrounding modern buildings against the sky as a backdrop. Therefore, their presence will not call undue attention to themselves or detract from the streetscape or historic buildings, and that the proposed modifications to the new building design will not diminish the previously approved design or detract from the streetscape. However, I find that I recommend that the applicant work with the staff to further study the parapet and determine whether it might be somewhat more extensive than currently.
And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
So that's approved. Please continue to work with the staff on the parapet, and we'll move to our public hearing agenda.
Yes, and we'll start that with public hearing item number 1, LPC 23-00224. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1494, Lot 72, 1014 Fifth Avenue in the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. This is a Beaux-Arts-style townhouse designed by Welch, Smith, and Provat and built in 1906 to 07. And the application is to alter the areaway, modify windows and doors, and enlarge a rear yard addition.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. They now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen, and then you can advance the slides using your, perfect. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Thank you very much.
Wait a second. Please don't hit escape, okay? Please click on your screen. I'm sorry, Melanie. Harriet, please click on your screen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Are we set?
Please proceed.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, commissioners. Madam Chair, thank you for having us. My name is Melanie Myers. I'm with Fried Frank, representing the applicant. I am joined by Matt Ball and Harriet Bartlett of David Chipperfield Architects, along with representatives of the owners and the Broaders design team. As was said, this is an application for a certificate of appropriateness for renovations to 1014 Fifth Avenue. 1014 is an early 20th century townhouse that has been used since the 1960s as a cultural and educational center and will continue to serve this purpose with a proposal. Next slide, please. The building is located between 82nd and 83rd Streets within the Museum Mile Historic District, directly across from the Met. You can see, I think from this image, that it's on a narrow and a quite deep lot with a large rear yard that will be preserved. And as you can see, it is sandwiched between two much taller 14 to 15 story apartment buildings that occupy the majority of their lot. Next slide, please. The certificate of appropriateness includes changes to the ground floor of the west facade, an addition on the east facade that will continue the existing profile upward in the building. Minor changes, well, changes to the north and south facades, as well as roof and bulkhead replacements. Matt Ball from Chipperfield will briefly speak to the history of the building and the attended program, and then Harriet Bartlett will describe the elements of the certificate of appropriateness request. So next slide, and I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everybody on the call. So I'd just like to briefly set the scene for the project, as it were, in terms of giving a bit of the historic context and then a bit of the future vision for the project. So the house was built as a pair of townhouses speculatively back in 1906 to the designs of the architect Smith, Welch and Provost. I think perhaps what's most significant is that in the 1920s, the house was bought by James W. Gerard, the US ambassador to Germany. And in that time, certain renovations were already made to the lower floors. There were extensions to the rear of the house, and also modifications to the front, to the west facade, with modification to the stoop. Sorry. Next slide, please. In the 60s, the house was sold by the family of the former ambassador to the German government, and the house became the Goethe Institute, or Goethe House as it was known, and was, something of a sort of cultural venue on the Upper East Side, and existed as the Goethe Institute for a significant amount of time and had some quite important exhibitions and events there. And coming to today, or rather at the end of 2009, the building was deemed unfit for purpose, so the Goethe Institute moved out. But the German government retained the building and conceived of a plan to refurbish and reopen the building in the form of as a cultural institute, and founded 1014 Inc., which is a non-for-profit organization. So that's the brief history. In terms of then the vision for the project, if you just go to the next slide. So the primary goal is very much to sort of refurbish and bring the house back to life as a cultural institute, as I said. And that breaks down into a series of public spaces on the lower two floors, as you see in this diagram, exhibitions and events, floors 1 and 2. And at the top of the building, the top two floors will be apartments for resident scholars who will stay there for up to 6 months, 6-month periods. In the middle, there are spaces for the sort of administration and common room. Next slide, please. I think, what's sort of of central importance is the idea of, refurbishing, restoring this building and opening it back up to the public, that it can be enjoyed in the form of events such as lectures and concerts, gatherings, etc. Next slide, please. As part of the renovation and providing the spaces required, we will extend to the east, to the rear, adding a common room and a scholar's kitchen. And this diagram shows Sorry, if you just go back, please, Harriet. It shows the addition of those two primary spaces over and above the existing outline indicated by the red sort of dash line. And finally, next slide, please. Thanks. From an architectural point of view, our motivation, not only with this project, but in general, is very much to work with existing buildings, not against them. And that's to sort of listen and empathize with what we find on site and build out of these conditions. So in terms of both the character of the new spaces, but also in terms of the construction methods, we are very much trying to be sensitive and build out of what's there, and to an extent in keeping with the original house. So that's it from me. I'll pass over to Harriet now to go through the design in more detail. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm going to walk you through the elements of the refurbishment associated with the Certificate of Appropriateness request. We've divided it up into 4 main sections, starting first with the west facade on 5th Avenue, looking at the east facade next, and then ending with the north and south facades and the roofscape. So starting first with the west facade, we collected and analyzed the original drawings from 1906 to better understand the building and the original design intent for the townhouse. I think the key takeaways for us was that the original building had a more clearly defined front yard area, delineated by what was quite a generous stoop and external light well. And much of the original townhouse of the facade exists today: the copper mansard roof, the limestone facade detailing, and metalwork of the balconies. So at the beginning, it was very important to us to kind of untangle and try to determine what is truly the original condition. And what we soon learned is, the archive drawings, which you can see on the left here, showed a kind of greater divisions of the windows, the kind of fenestration showed more kind of Munton divisions than what we understand to be the original condition, which you can see in the later photographs. The tax log photos show what we understand to be the original condition, where the glass panes were kind of larger than the archive drawings. And then in a later kind of 90s LPC request, they replaced all of the existing windows in kind. And we understand that in the 80s, they had introduced sash windows, which were not original. And then in the 90s, these were replaced and rectified as part of the 90s LPC approval. As part of our works, I won't go into too much detail, but we are proposing a number of required facade repairs, which we've developed the specifications of with the facade consultant and structural engineer. I just wanted to mention that as part of our proposed works that we would work with at staff level. And then this is a summary of the proposals to the west facade. We're proposing to replace all the windows in kind from the 2nd to 6th floor. And then we are proposing to also kind of alter the front entrance area, introducing a new front entrance gate and canopy, a new window, and a new kind of limestone landscape, which I'll show the details of in the later slides. So you can see the existing condition today, looking at 1014. And then you can see our proposed condition, where it would be the open gate scenario during the day. And we're really keen to kind of reactivate the 1014's relationship to 5th Avenue, signifying this renewed cultural building to the street. And then this is the condition at night when the gate would be closed. And, as I said, we're going to talk about each of the new elements that we're introducing in a little bit more detail and give background to their design in the coming slides. So it was important for us to first understand the original stoop condition at the start of our research and design development. And, our position is that the original condition created a more gradual threshold from public to private, as well as this kind of semi-defensible space, which is clearly connected to the townhouse and separate from the public sidewalk. And we feel like that was successful and something that we wanted to reinvigorate as part of the proposed works. And we estimated on the archive drawings that this encroached into the sidewalk about 14.5 feet. And then this is moving to the current condition today. You can see that in the 1920s, as Matt was saying, there was a number of kind of significant alterations to the front area where we lost the light well and stoop, and the external stairs were pushed inside. The window and front gate were altered, or front door, sorry, was altered, and the window was pushed inwards, and then the stoop was pushed inside, and there were stairs placed in the vestibule. And I think what we feel our kind of critique of the condition today is that creates this very sharp transition from public to private space with very little defined external space associated with the townhouse. And this is not only unusual for townhouses in the area, but also for public buildings, which we'll show in our kind of research and studies of the area. I won't dwell on this too much, but we have kind of studied the conditions along Fifth Avenue and in the Upper East Side. And I think what became very clear is that 1014 is one of the only addresses on the street without any form of sidewalk improvement. Many of the residential properties have quite generous planters, which improve the kind of feel of the street and these kind of changing conditions along the street, which we think are quite successful. And also there are kind of existing light wells and stoops to neighboring schools and other kind of cultural institutions along the street. And then this is just photographs documenting some of those conditions in the neighboring buildings. And then zooming in on our block, looking in a little bit more detail, the neighbors to the north have a planter that extends about 10'10" into the street. Neighbors to the south have a planter which extends about 14'4" into the street. And, you know, I think we're quite keen, as I said, to kind of reinstate the stoop that once was there, and to also kind of mediate between these two planters that are existing. And I think something just to kind of briefly touch on is that we think that the myth that we've obviously got this kind of large institution facing us with this quite successful limestone landscape, which we feel kind of speaks to a more kind of cultural civic landscape, which we wanted to bring into our proposals. And then this is looking just photographs of the existing condition today for your reference, looking at 1014 and the neighboring planters. And yeah, across the street, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And then moving to our proposals, you know, I think we're very clear that we wanted to reinstate this more kind of defined front entrance area, taking the line of the original stoop. And, you know, the entrance would be really defined by this new limestone landscape, which runs from the interior to the exterior. And, you know, it also relates to the limestone of the front facade and existing building. We're introducing a new vestibule, which is an external space, as a way of introducing the required ADA elevator to mediate the levels. And we're quite keen for this to feel like an extension of the public realm, and is not uncommon for kind of cultural buildings to have. And as part of this landscape, it's composed of a number of different elements. So we'd introduced a fairly simple limestone bench, a signboard kind of mailbox for the client for 1014 to add posters for events. And then there would also be a new entrance gate to mediate between the two, kind of the vestibule and the new front yard, and then a new entrance door to the interior, as well as a canopy, an entrance canopy, which would be fixed back to the gate. And just, I want to give a little bit of background to the design of some of these elements. We studied the kind of evolution of the front door of 1014. You can see the rendering of the original condition to the left. The 1920s door, as I mentioned earlier, there were significant alterations in the 20s when the gate and door kind of altered together. and the door was increased in size and had this kind of vertical bar language. And then you can see the condition today is it's not original, it's not historic, and it's a kind of collage of the 1920s alteration with a kind of later alteration. We wanted to study other kind of front gate conditions in the area. And I think what became clear is that there really is this kind of variety of topologies in the area. You know, vertical bars, patterned, graphic, golden. You know, I think we were quite fascinated by all the different conditions. And then looking particularly at cultural buildings in the area, I think there is also this kind of great diversity in styles. But I think what we felt was quite successful were the ones that had kind of celebrated the front entrance gate as something different to the rest of the facade. And maybe I think we were quite clear that we wanted to move away from this kind of vertical bar language, which we feel speaks to more kind of domestic security. And then something to just touch on is that the existing facade has many different metalwork styles and patterns, and is this kind of collage of metalwork. So you can see the cast iron balustrade and kind of Beaux-Arts style, and then more geometric rectilinear metalwork. And then looking in more detail at the proposals, you can see we're introducing the new entrance gate. And I think it's quite clear for us that we wanted to move away from the vertical bar language, as I said, as it speaks more to security. And then I think that, you know, we're kind of building on this history of alterations to the front window and gate together. They've been developed together over the years. And I think, you know, essentially we were quite clear that we wanted it to appear more like a gate because it is connecting to external spaces now, and the entrance door is being pushed in. And we didn't, I think in its expression, it's important that there is an emphasis on metalwork rather than kind of panelized doors that would compete potentially with the windows and terrace doors above. And we, you know, I think the windows have this kind of square language, the kind of square expression. And we've kind of intensified that in the design of the gate and used that as a way of kind of expressing it more as a gate than an entrance door. And this would be alongside the window and the bench and the signboard, which I'll show the details of now. Just looking at the gate, and it's the way that it interfaces with the canopy. It's both made of painted steel. A lot of the existing metalwork is painted metalwork. And then we were quite clear that we wanted the entrance canopy to be transparent so that you can still maintain sight of the original cartouche above the door. And then there are no kind of fixings directly into the limestone facade. The entrance canopy would be fixed back to the frame of the gate on the inside, and it would feel kind of all in keeping. And then looking at the window, we'd be removing the security bars, the kind of vertical security bars of the existing window, and instating a painted steel, simple fixed window with a similar kind of mullion expression to what's there today. And then this is just ending on the signboard. The Goethe Institute has historically had ways of kind of advertising their cultural events in the past. Not saying that it was the most successful design in the past, but it was of its time. And I think we wanted to reinterpret that. And we also needed to include a mailbox. So we've introduced a kind of fixed poster case signboard for them to add information about events, and also a mailbox. And you can see the design today, it would be painted steel with brass numbering. And this would kind of relate to the brass handle and pivot plate on the front gate as well. And then just briefly, you know, the limestone bench would be a very kind of simple construction and relate to the limestone paving. So this is just a summary of the materials. It would be a palette of painted steel metalwork, brass details to the gate door handle and pivot plate to kind of celebrate the connection between the gate and the limestone paving. And then, yes, all new kind of limestone paving and bench in keeping with the facade. And then this is just a look at how that all comes together. Okay, then moving to the east facade.
Sorry to interrupt. I've just seen a note that maybe
I keep it moving.
Running a little over, so we could speed through these.
Okay, ones. I'm going to keep it moving. Okay, so just looking at the east facade, this is a zoning diagram that just summarizes the extent of the rear enlargement. And the red line shows the existing building profile and the gray, the extent of the new. And wanted to just touch on the area in blue, which is the extent of the 1920s extension. So there has been a kind of history of alterations to the rear, and we would be looking to remove the existing winter garden in the garden. And then you can see just how that articulates itself to the facade. And we'd be proposing new bricks in keeping with the existing bricks, a similar kind of sand kind of honey-colored brick with large new painted steel windows, kind of a crittle style that would connect through to the new common room and scholars spaces. And then you can see the existing condition today with the existing outriggers that would be removed. And then also the winter garden that would be removed. And you can see our proposed where we'd be extending up from the existing building walls in a similar brick. And yeah, it's you can see the kind of the large new windows and the private roof terrace as well, with kind of these larger walls which create a sense of privacy to the neighboring buildings. And then just a summary of the palette of materials, the bricks in keeping with the existing windows to the auditorium, similar to the existing, and the proposed new steel windows to the rear enlargement. And we checked that the rear enlargement is not visible from the neighboring streets. And this is just kind of racing through those alleyways. And then I'll end on the north and south facades and the roofscape. This shows the kind of existing alley conditions, the courtyard conditions to the neighboring buildings. And then you can see the existing outriggers here on the left, and then the proposed rear enlargement on the right with brick as well. And then the winter garden, which is a kind of interior garden space that would have a 2-hour fire resistant glass block wall as a way of kind of addressing the lot line fire rating requirements. And then on the south, you can see the existing outriggers again, and then the rear enlargement with brick tied into the existing brick. And then ending on the roof, you can see there's the existing stair bulkhead, elevator and equipment, which we would remove, and the water tower, which would be removed. And then we would be introducing a new DOAS unit, and a green sedum roof, and a new stair bulkhead and pergola above the roof terrace. And then we checked that the sightlines from Fifth Avenue and Met, that they don't, you don't see any of this new equipment. Okay, that's a round up.
Thank you very much. Thank you for covering everything so clearly. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions at this time, so we will move to public testimony. If you're in the meeting and would like to testify in this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. As always, we will start with anyone who signed up in advance and then get to everyone else. But whether or not you signed up in advance, please raise your virtual hand, because we will be looking for your name you used to sign in the attendees list. So raise your virtual hand in any case. And I will turn it over to Sonia Giar, our Director of Intergovernmental and Community Affairs, to take us through the testimony. Sonia, are you doing it today?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we do have a number of people signed up. Our first speaker will be Laura Variale from Friends of the Upper East Side, and I'll be promoting you to panelists now, Laura. And if you can please unmute your mic and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, this is Laura Waverly representing Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Chair Carroll and Honorable Commissioners, Friends would like to commend the applicant for having listened to the community's concern and implemented key changes to the proposal for this Boza townhouse. This project reinforces the benefits of the collaboration with the community allowed by the public review process. Despite the extensive glazing at the rear facade, Friends Preservation Committee does not oppose the rear infill. The finishing materials are in keeping with the building's style, and the modern design will not detract from the historic character and is befitting of the proposed use for the structure. Furthermore, this block is already largely built with no discernible donut, and the addition would not be visible from any public thoroughfare. While the applicant's approach of treating the main entrance as a gate is interesting, the proposed design is not appropriate to the town's house style and character. Friends strongly opposes the removal of the detailed, historic, albeit not original, ironwork at the ground floor window and door transom. The proposed gate design is too heavy and disproportionate to the building style. In addition, the presentation is not clear about how the two planes of the proposed canopy will relate to the facade and entrance. The removal of the areaway wall and the backlit vitrine from the proposal shown to the community board is a welcome change, and Friends takes no issue with the limestone bench and painted steel signboard. While we understand the applicant's desire to create a buffer between the public and private space, the limestone paving has an awkward relationship to the concrete where the two materials meet at the northern corner of the areaway. Further refinement is needed at this juncture to bridge the gap between the two neighboring planter beds, which extend to varying depths into the sidewalk. We ask the applicant to continue listening to the community and to come back with a proposal that maintains the historic ironwork at the window and transom and with a more harmonious gate design that relates better to the existing ironwork. Both are the structures are characterized by a delicate balance between robust materials and elegant forms. The proposed geometric gate, as presented, fails to maintain this essential balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Lo van der Valk, and I'll be promoting you to panelists now. If you could please accept. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you having any difficulties?
Can you come back to me, please? I need to straighten something out.
Sure. All right. So our next speaker will be Michelle Arbalou. Michelle, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Michelle Arbalou for the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the proposed gate change and canopy inappropriate. We are confident the architect can find a code-compliant way of maintaining the existing handsome gate. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be James Colgate. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, commissioners, Chair Carroll. As requested, I will be brief and succinct. My name is James Colgate, partner at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner, and land use counsel to 1010 Tenants Corporation, which is the building directly to the south. You have heard or will hear from residents that interventions on the front facade and in the public right-of-way diminish, if not betray, the residential character of the building. And so I will not repeat those objections. Rather, my 3 minutes will focus on the rear yard addition, which, while not visible from the street, has impacts on the block's central open space. The block plan provided with the application did not identify the heights of the other rear yard additions. Such information ought to be essential for you to be able to compare the depth, width, height of the proposed addition to the predominant depths, widths, and heights of the Ls and additions of buildings of similar type. My client has submitted images electronically last week, including annotated block plan and aerial photography to try to provide the missing context. We hope these images will be helpful to you. From a review of these images, as well as just from looking out their windows, my clients find that 1014's rear yard and rear facade are not distant or removed from the context of the open space at the center of the block. To the contrary, 1014's rear yard and rear facade align precisely at the western edge of the block's central open space and can be seen most clearly in the last aerial photograph attached, the view looking west. This view shows that the alignment at the western end extends the length of the block's central donut hole and provides an increased context for the rear additions of the other houses. Context that my clients believe would be wiped away by the proposal's aggressively deep, wide, and tall enlargement, which would be inconsistent with the scale of the other enlargements on the block and overwhelm the block's central open space. The problem they see is that the proposal would unnecessarily push the added floor area upwards to take advantage of the beautiful views it would have of the rear of the other houses, and in so doing, destroying the up to now reciprocal view of the rear of itself. They would not agree with the architect's explanation that it empathizes. Exacerbating the problem is that the proposal, one, would introduce a double height space on the third and fourth story at the common room and almost a double height space at the fifth and sixth floor, taking more volume than they need to. The proposal would introduce 20-foot full height parapet walls at the sides of the fifth floor balcony, unnecessarily eating up the sky and resulting in the impression of a full height addition instead of providing, for instance, 6-foot high privacy walls on the sides. The proposal would introduce an unprecedented balcony projecting at the third floor, right at the eye level and 12 feet away from some of my clients' north-facing apartment windows. My clients urge the commission to direct the applicant to develop a solution for enlarging the building at the cellar and first floor only, as that ought to be able to achieve its expansion objectives without adversely impacting the common open space in the middle of the block, and would leave intact the building's characteristic cascading half-wide terraced additions that contribute to the character of the interior of this block. I'm happy to answer any questions the commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now return to Lo Vandervalk. If you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, and sorry for that mix-up.
That's okay.
My name is Lo Vandervalk. I'm president of Carnegie Hill Neighbors and speaking on behalf of them, and we would like to limit our comments to what is visible from the public way. CHN is concerned because we share Fifth Avenue in the Carnegie Hill Historic District, and we view the avenue as an important boulevard that should maintain the widest possible sidewalks and unflooded areaways. Speaking first to the front areaway, we applaud the alterations made following the Community Board 8 Landmarks Committee meeting. We think that the incursion into the sidewalk space has been reduced to no more than that observed by the planters of the building to the north, 1016, which conforms to the majority of buildings on the east side of Fifth Avenue, running from 79th Street to 98th Street. We also note that 1010 is probably a more exceptional planter incursion into the sidewalk, so we are pleased that that the example of 1016 has been used so that the sidewalk maintains its breadth. We also note that there are no visible rooftop additions, and that makes it the roof line, which is very visible from the Metropolitan Museum across the street, more acceptable. The significance in the front area, the signboard in the front areaway, its design is tasteful and it does not use electronic signage that creates excessive light. And this is appropriate for Fifth Avenue. And we hope that the commission will insist that there'd be no backlighting ever, and that the more conventional light shining from the top of the signboard downward be maintained. We also note that there is no signage or lettering on the building. That's a benefit. Finally, as to the entry door and gate, our initial take was that we would have preferred something more in keeping with the Beaux-Arts facade. But we understand that this treatment is more accessible and welcoming to the public, and in keeping with the institution's mission. Perhaps this is a type of adaptive reuse of the doorway. I mean, it's certainly not harking back to the historic period. It's a sharp departure. We understand that. So all in all, we are, if the commission could possibly consider an alteration of the orthogonal lattice work of the door, which does draw the eye to the door and not to the building. And actually, if you're going to go with a more modern design, we would have preferred the larger panes presented at Community Board 8. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Marcia Goldstein. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Are you able to unmute your line?
Okay, thank you. It just popped up. Thank you. My name is Marcia Goldstein. I am a resident of 1010 Fifth Avenue. I wanted to follow up and, of course, support the comments of James Colgate, who spoke on behalf of our building. I think that the 1014 presentation, frankly, doesn't sufficiently highlight the unprecedented proportions of the and the institutional look of the proposed rear extension. I think they portrayed it as consistent with prior extensions, empathetic to their neighbors at 1010 and 1014 in terms of privacy. But I think it should be noted that as a neighbor at 1010, I don't believe that having a solid wall right in front of my windows, which will completely block existing light, is empathetic to their neighbors. As Mr. Colgate pointed out, this building, the extension appears to be larger in height, depth, and width than other yard additions on the block, and is overwhelming in terms of existing space. The design of it, frankly, putting aside the light and solid wall issue that as an individual I find upsetting, but the design is very modern and institutional, and I don't think is consistent with the block as it exists, and that the extension is very inconsistent with the block and does totally use up the existing open space between the buildings. It does not preserve a large yard between the buildings, I think as one of their representatives may have said. So I just wanted to indicate my strong opposition to the rear extension as proposed, and wanted to be sure that the individual tenant view is heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Sarah Khalifa. Sarah, I'll be promoting you to panelist now. If you could please accept that request. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Voila. Good morning. This is Sarah Khalifa. I agree with the previous speaker. I don't want to waste your time. I don't really like the drawings that were shown for the facade and the entryway. I don't think they're appropriate for the look of the building. And I really don't approve of adding an extension in the back, because a lot of my neighbors will lose light. I cede my time to the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Suzanne Murphy. And I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
This is Suzanne Murphy. I am also a tenant of 1010 Fifth Avenue. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And I want to reiterate the comments that my neighbors, Ms. Goldstein and Ms. Khalifa, have already addressed. I'm very concerned about this large addition, both the institutional nature and look of it. I've lived in my apartment for 22 years. I just finished right before the pandemic, a very substantial renovation of that apartment. My light would be blocked, as would be that of my neighbors. You know, when I purchased this apartment, it was very much because I did not have blockage from other buildings, and I had open views and can see sky, all of which would be destroyed. I'm also concerned about the proposed use of the public space in the buildings and the noise and the commotion that would cause, which would certainly be of detriment to the peaceful life my young child lives at this point in time. But in terms of the facade, I also agree that it is going to not be in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. And so I vehemently propose this proposal, and I cede the rest of my time.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Richard Markowitz. And I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
My name is Richard Markowitz. I'm also a resident at 1010 Fifth Avenue, and I object to the proposed additions here because of the substantial changes that would be made to the central open space that really extends from the 1014 townhouse all the way down the block interior to as far as Madison Avenue and the buildings on Madison Avenue. That core and central open space, I think, is an important and integral consideration for this commission, and I thank them for the time they give us and public residents to state our position. The addition of the common room and the scholar's kitchen is not consistent with the entire block, and this building forms an important anchor as the most Western condition or Western boundary of the interior open space that is so important to myself and the other residents here at 1010 Fifth Avenue, as well as other residents on the block. I think it affects adversely the depth, the height, and the solidness of that building by those extensions that don't exist today and have not existed for the entire life of the building. I also object to the changes to the front of the building. While I'm not an architect, I believe that the public space, which is gardens, they showed themselves that all the way up and down Fifth Avenue, there are gardens and public plantings. They would have none, and it actually, between the bench and the canopy, to be honest, it looks like a bus stop here in Manhattan. Thank you for your time, and I cede the rest of my time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Steve Rabin, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you so much for your time. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Steve Rabin. I'm a resident of the Metropolitan Museum Historic District, and I believe your decision today might be the most important in the district's 45-year history. You're being asked to approve the conversion of a residential building, and a building that has been zoned residential since it was built till this very day, into an institutional building on one of the most visible residential blocks in the city. Each year, 7 million visitors step out of the Metropolitan Museum of Art at 82nd Street, and they look directly across the street to the site. And what they see today is a unique, intact, and most importantly, a residential block. In addition, there's an estimated 250,000 annual views of the rear public open space from the adjoining buildings. As been pointed out, 1014 is a focal point and the westernmost apex for views to the museum and the open sky from this open space. I'd like to focus my remarks on the proposed design, massing, and materials. In the front, a mini plaza with a bench is proposed to echo the institutional design of the museum. The historic residential design on the east side of Fifth Avenue, which has been preserved by landmarks since 1977, is to use a buffer zone of fencing and plantings. This new mini plaza will create a strange gap in the residential nature of the district, which the applicant says is actually the major intent of their plan. The applicant's own study shows how out of character the proposal is, and the 1912 photo they've submitted shows the historic separation between public sidewalk and entrance for this neighborhood. It should be also noted that the museum has a 24-hour security station that keeps people from sleeping on their benches and causing disturbances, and a security station is not currently included in the applicant's plan. In the rear, the most significant part of this proposal is to create a full height and width addition to the rear. The current volume of the building includes several additions and expansions completed before 1977, and it is already one of the largest townhouses of this style and period in the district. 1014 has a terraced rear facade currently consistent with the other townhouses in the shared historic open space and in the neighborhood, and the proposed full height squared off expansion is consistent with a commercial building, not a residential building. Finally, the proposed window plans on the east and north facades are for extremely large double height glass walls of either metal and glass or glass block, both inconsistent with the materials and scale of the secondary residential windows of the open space. I agree with Community Board 8 and encourage you to reject this proposal. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Christina Conroy, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, good morning, commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, there are several different elements in this proposal which the VSNY will address separately. We have no problem with the design or installation of the proposed bench, which is symmetrical, echoing the many balanced elements of the facade and does not touch any historic material. The freestanding sign box seems overly wide with an obtrusive rounded top that should be minimized. It does have the advantage of having no contact with historic material and is placed far enough away from the facade to allow full visibility as pedestrians move along the sidewalk. However, we feel strongly that this distinctive Fifth Avenue Beaux-Arts style townhouse deserves a better design for a new entry door. Good House proposes to replace century-old historic fabric with a metal grid for both transom and entry door, compromising the building's historic ironwork. The applicants haven't explained why the existing historic door and transom cannot be reused, or at least have some century-old decorative element used as inspiration in the proposed replacement. If the applicant believes that the existing doors are too heavy, we suggest that the new sign box would be an excellent location for an automatic door opener. Why allow replacement of an historic transom when its location can remain the same above the proposed marquee? And a larger photograph of the existing entry would help clarify what would be lost. The proposed door is also problematic in that when opened, it will create an asymmetrical entrance, which in a building where all the historic elements are symmetrical would call undue attention to itself. Further, the slab-like marquee is also incompatible when a lighter, more transparent unit could be used. Finally, at the rear facade, the proposed addition appears to retain two second-floor historic windows, but explodes upward with a giant gridded glass wall. If the existing brick pier width was retained at each side of the facade and the glass wall more carefully detailed, this would be a better facade. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Shanaz Batamanglish. Apologize if I mispronounced that. I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, this is Shanaz Batamanglish. I live in 7A on 1010 Fifth. My concerns are less about preservation and historical design because it's so arbitrary. But what would be the construction time and noise level for these kinds of buildings? And would you need an easement to get back to make the addition?
Okay, so just to be clear, we don't have back and forth Q&A during public testimony. So we will have you testify, and the applicants at the end will respond to any aspect of the testimony they choose to. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Victoria Blau-Orlin, and I'll be promoting you to panelist now. And if you can please state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to start by thanking you all for letting me speak. My name is Victoria Blau-Orlin. I am a resident at 1016 Fifth Avenue, and I am also an architect. 1014 Fifth Avenue was built as a residential townhouse. What is being proposed in many ways goes against the spirit of this residential place, and in no way bringing this home closer to its original state. The design is actually going consciously against the original building. The elements that 1014 is proposing and the inconsistency with the rest of the block and area would change the ethos of a 1906 home, which would be lost to a more modern and contemporary commercial design. On the west facade, the steel and glass window, steel medieval style gate, bench, illuminated signage, etc. are not architecturally characteristic to a residential townhouse. On the east facade, the lack of continuity of the central open space, how this addition in the rear will unnecessarily reduce the central open area, the addition to the rear yard, the height, the depth, and the width will all overwhelm and be inconsistent with the relationship between historic townhouse and adjacent apartment buildings to the central space. The materials presented are not consistent with the rest of this residential block, such as the glass and steel double height glazing and the glass block fill. The double height two-story glazing has also on the east facade, has an overwhelming scale and a commercial feel that, again, is inconsistent with a residential historic townhouse. Overall, the design of the east facade, the materials, scale, are not consistent with the rest of the block or neighborhood. Nothing of what is being proposed anywhere on this home are bringing this building closer to its original 1906 construction, design, or intention. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do not have any additional speakers signed up, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends denial, citing various issues, including the entry door and glass entrance canopy. Noise and light pollution are noted concerns, and concerns regarding additions such as the limestone bench and additional mass at the rear are seen by the community board to encroach on too much public and shared space. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you. And I will turn to the applicant team and ask if you would like to respond to the comments we've heard. And I want to just first note that, of course, the issues that are under the purview of the Landmarks Preservation Commission are design, size, scale, materials, relationship to context by virtue of the size, scale, and materials. And those are the issues that we will be focusing on. So I would encourage the response to address the testimony that we've heard relating to those aspects of the proposal. If you choose to address the light, noise, and construction timing, that is all up to you, but again, not part of our purview. So I will turn it back to you to address any of the comments that we've heard today.
Sure, and I'll start. And just in terms of the elements that are outside of your purview, one of the things we certainly will do is work and coordinate with our neighbors when the project moves forward. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I also just, the one other thing which was in a couple of individuals' testimony was about the residential nature of the building, which it certainly was designed as a residential building. And from a use standpoint, the use has been a cultural institutional use for many decades. And so I do think that that's important to know, but understand that there are design comments that were embedded in some of the comments about the use itself. I wanted to just mention and talk a little bit about some of the comments about the rear facade and the enlargement that's being proposed there. And Harriet and Matt may want to talk about some of the comments that we heard about the front. But on the rear, and I don't know that we can go back to the presentation, but this is sort of a unique block in that it's a combination of large apartment buildings, which have an effect on the central space, as well as the mixture of townhouses. And in particular, if we can go, and maybe the site plan is at the very beginning might be one of the easier places to look at.
Melanie, Harriet, if you just click on your screen, you'll have access again.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. Do I have to go through it all? But the building truly is, and this is, I think, is a good image just for the first part of this conversation. I think, as you can see, it truly is sandwiched between the two larger buildings. And the block itself is a mixture of quite large buildings as well as townhouses on the southern boundary. We're not extending the building eastward into the yard. And when I refer to there being a large yard, it's because we do have a 180-foot lot and we have a quite significant open space that is behind the rear of the building. That will be preserved. There is a balcony element on one floor that will extend minimally into that space, but otherwise that portion of the site will be retained. Given the relationship of the townhouse to the two large townhouse buildings on either side, which again have elements which go up to 14 and 15 stories, we do think that the enlargement that's being proposed at the rear of the building is consistent with the profile of the buildings on either side of us. It's something that we do think is appropriate, and it will allow for the building to move forward. So I think that some of those comments certainly understand the concerns about an enlargement, but it's quite modest. It's well within what zoning in fact allows for, and we do believe that we've been thoughtful about how that element's been provided. And I will turn it over to Harriet, see if you want to talk a little bit about the thinking. I think most of the comments were related to the thoughts about the front entryway in terms of the gate and the ground floor. And so if that's helpful, I'd ask Harriet to talk about that a little bit more.
Yes, I'll let Matt just speak briefly first, and then I can.
Well, I was just gonna, thanks, Harriet. I mean, you should speak about the details of it, but I thought it was, very welcome and reassuring to hear that our alterations after the community board presentation were applauded by some, and we appreciate that. We obviously do want to be quite sensitive and careful in our modifications to this building. The front facade onto Fifth Avenue is clearly the most important face of this building, and our interventions aim to be sensitive to the overall historic context and the materiality, but also to a certain extent signify the new life of this building. As Melanie said, it started off life as a residential house, and since became a cultural institute, which it will continue to be. So the precise design of the elements is very much thought out of what makes sense in terms of signifying the role that this building plays in the city on Fifth Avenue, opposite the Met, but indeed as part of a residential complex. So I suppose all I'm trying to say is that we're trying to balance up civic gesture on the one hand and residential character on the other. Maybe Harriet, you want to sort of expand on that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, I'll just build on some of those points. I think, we've kind of carefully studied the existing building and the materials there, and we've really, in the front yard area, we're proposing limestone, painted metalwork, brass detailing, which was kind of inspired from the original building. And in the rear, we're also, we're proposing a sand honey-colored brick, which is in keeping with the existing building. And where we are introducing kind of larger expanses of glass, we have always kind of sought to break down the scale of that with a more domestic kind of scale to the fenestration. So you can see with the kind of Hope style windows, we were very clear we wanted them to be broken down in a kind of more domestic scale. Just touching on the kind of front door and the front gate, I think listening to all the comments and just to kind of touch on the thinking behind the design, I think we're very clear that this is now no longer a front door. It doesn't require the kind of appearance of a front door anymore. It's now becoming an entrance gate. So we feel like it is appropriate to alter its expression and for it to feel and appear as an entrance gate, as it's now linking to external spaces. And I think we studied a lot of the neighboring conditions in the area, and were quite interested in how many of the other cultural buildings have a kind of signified or celebrated front entrance gate, which sometimes is different to the rest of the facade. And it kind of shows the kind of alterations over the years. You can kind of see that in a number of the neighboring precedents. And I think we were quite clear that we wanted to move away from the kind of historic vertical bar language, which speaks to kind of security, and for it to kind of, yeah, as we were kind of explaining earlier, for it to feel like the kind of appearance of a gate where there is an emphasis on kind of articulated metalwork and using the kind of grid, the kind of intensification of the existing window styles, the squareness to them, and kind of borrowing that language as a way of designing the gate. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm happy to answer any further questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have at least one set of questions. Commissioner Shamir Baran, please go ahead.
Thanks. This may have been stated, but I wonder if you could just repeat it in the case that it was. The age or and condition of the existing door, gate, metal rails, and so on.
So you mean the existing front entrance door as it is today? So it's the light above is from the 19...
the photograph.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to... It's the light above is from the 1920s alteration, and then the door today is from a later alteration. We couldn't date it, but it's not original. I'll just go back to the... There we go.
You believe it might be 80s or 90s? The actual door.
80s or 1980s or 90s.
Yeah, the door below.
But the transom is...
Transom's from the 1920s.
Yeah,
alteration.
Exactly. I would say, I mean, the door as it currently is today is somewhat a reinterpretation of the door as it was in the 1920s, which is the middle photograph here. But as you see on the right-hand photograph, which is the condition today, that the vertical bars are essentially straight extrusions or rolled bars. They are not the sort of articulated rounded bars of the 20s. Unlike the top lights, which is from the
condition of the transom. Is it in good repair?
It's not in the best state of repair, I don't believe, but it arguably could be restored. That is true.
Okay. Other questions, commissioners? Yeah. Oh, oops. Commissioner Jefferson, did you have a question?
I have two questions that have to do with the donut and the front entrance. I hope I'm not being too literal, but this gate, is it open to the weather or is it weatherproof that water cannot get into the lot?
It has a single pane of glass inside. Yeah. So it feels like a gate, but it does have a single pane of glass.
Okay. The other issue is the courtyard, the donut. Is there any original fabric left on that building at all in the courtyard?
Let me just go to it would be the 1920s extension at the lower levels. I'll just go to the zoning diagram.
That would be it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's from the 1920s at the lower levels.
Nothing from the original.
The outriggers are original, which you can see here, the setbacks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So those are original. Okay.
The upper floors are original, and then the lower floors are 1920s.
Okay, so your addition is covering up the existing fabric that was there originally from the 20s, correct?
Well, we're proposing to remove the existing outriggers as they're in poor condition, and then extend up from the 1920s walls.
So from the third and fourth floor, you're extending to the east, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to send you all requests to unmute so that we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion now. And this has been presented, is for changes to the volume at the back of the building, which is no deeper than the existing lower floor additions and set within the context of 2 larger, deeper apartment buildings. And at the front, we have the removal of the historic transom and non-historic gate to install a new gate, new canopy, sign box, bench, removal of window grill, and the new limestone paving to create an entrance space for the building. So we'll begin the discussion. Commissioners, I'll ask you to address both the front and the back as we move around the table for our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. Very interesting presentation on a very important building in a very important location. Let me tackle the rear first. I think that issues about extension and bulk in relationship to a donut, quote unquote, are relatively irrelevant for this building. The block, as shown in the site plan, is not a classic donut configuration, as we might see in other places. It's much more typical, actually, of the Upper East Side, between 5th and Lex, where you see a lot of these Beaux-Arts blocks with highly occluded donuts with multiple additions, often leaving little to no rear yard space to speak of. So, and because this building is in between 2 larger buildings that extend further back and are quite a bit higher, I don't believe that considering the addition as intrusive to the donut is a particularly germane approach. And I think that the additions shown would be appropriate from that perspective. The other way I would look at it is from the vantage point of, is the original mass of the building being overwhelmed by the additions? And while I think that line of review is appropriate in many locations, again, because of the typology and history of the Upper East Side townhouse blocks, which have undergone multiple additions and accretions in the rear, and that is typical of the district, I don't think that this extent of modification, even though it does substantially add volume to, and even though it does obscure the volume of the original construction, I don't think that that's inappropriate. Especially for a community facility structure like this, cultural building, and not a single family house. So I think that from those perspectives, the volume of the rear yard addition is appropriate. I think that the fenestration with large openings and steel framed windows is well within the kind of thing we've approved. We sometimes on residential buildings ask for scale reductions in double height openings, but again, because of the community facility nature of the structure, I don't think that's a relevant comment. I think that the applicants might be wise, given the neighborhood they live in and its endowments, let's say, that they should engage in a conversation with the neighbors about possibly modifying the side walls, modifying those wing walls to allow for more light and air and view for the neighbors, but I don't think that's within our ambit to discuss. I think that the green space and walls and trellises are all appropriate as shown in this rendering. The front is very interesting also. And I was kind of, listening to the presentation, I was kind of surprised when we got to see what your proposal was for the front yard, because it sounded like you were winding up to do something different, to me anyway. I thought that the analysis of the green space along the block and along Fifth Avenue more generally was very compelling. And I was very disappointed that you felt that you could meet that with a line of limestone that was flush with the sidewalk. I personally don't think that that's the case. And I think that if you argue, as you did, that the typology of the street experience along Fifth Avenue, and certainly along this block, is one of green space alternating with entry, I think that the preponderance of limestone here does not follow that pattern. And I would suggest that a more appropriate intervention would be one that sought to reconcile and integrate that kind of green space with the entry that you're proposing. That would not be the case if you were restoring the stoop, which you're not. But since you're not, which you need not do, I think that the absence of green is contextually peculiar and not, in my view, appropriate. I think that the gate and the notion of this being an open space to the outside is interesting. And I understand the indoor-outdoor limestone paving as a gesture to indicate that, and I think that's appropriate. I do, and I think that the design of the gate as a frankly modern thing is also appropriate. It's an institutional building. We allow some deference there, especially when historic material is not in play. One could make an argument perhaps that the transom should be retained. I have a feeling that others might make that argument, but I wouldn't. I think that it's okay to have a modern expression. And I think the canopy is okay too, but I don't think it should extend out beyond the opening width of the transom and gate below. It should restrain itself to that width. I think that the window is peculiar to me because it relates neither to the new gate nor to the historic wood mullioned windows above. It's kind of its own thing. And if it relates, if anything, to the backyard, which nobody will get from walking by on Fifth Avenue. So I would say that they might want to look at either having that window to be a matching wood window to the ones above, if that was their intention, or to have it be a more modern thing that relates to the gate. But I just don't think that the steel sash here really functions in any way to either signal a new intervention and a new program for a residential building, or to refer back to the historical material and design. I think that the bench and the rest of the paving are appropriate.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I think as usual, Commissioner Goldblum did an excellent analysis, especially in regard to the rear yard, the purview for the Landmark Commission here. He's right on the point. And I also totally agree with him about the window on the second floor here, in a sense about, I guess the applicant have a number of choices, and they have to make up their mind whether it is relating to the above, or and Commissioner Goldblum is absolutely right. No one will think of the proposed new metal window as relating to the back, because no one can see it by Fifth Avenue. And this is indeed a very prominent location. I think the slight thing I may have a different opinion with Commissioner Goldblum is relating to the green, since he made deference to this being an institutional institution. The greenery, I will defer to the other commissioners. And I also defer to the rest of the commissioners in regard to the canopy and the glass thing. I tend to lean toward the Commissioner Goldblum side on the design, and I'll wait to hear the rest of the commissioners what they feel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Vice Chair Bland.
Thank you. I found the whole presentation very appealing and interesting. I think Commissioner Goldblum's analysis of the rear is spot on to my own thoughts, and so I don't need to repeat them, and I won't, just in the interest of time, but I think that everything that's being proposed back there is appropriate. With regard to the issue of the continuous green gardens on the east side of Fifth Avenue for seemingly miles, certainly in this area as well, I never, ever walked that area without being amazed at the variety and the similarity within that variety of the established green strip. It's a very interesting, to me as a gardener, very interesting a series of individual gardens, and almost always impeccably, as you would assume would be the case, maintained. So where does that place me in this? I can see that maybe it's inappropriate to not continue that green. But I also can see, well, this is not a residential building, even though it was built as a house. It's now an institution. And so breaking it, and as the applicant has made the case for, is also perhaps appropriate. So where am I on this? I'm either or, I think, but I think this has been a beautifully rendered version of not keeping the green. But if the sentiment is to keep the green, I think in the hands of this architectural firm, they can certainly do a beautiful job of that too. The bench is beautiful and appropriate if it's to be retained in a limestone or the paving. If it goes green, it may not be there at all. I think the signboard is very elegantly done. And finally, I just want to speak briefly but powerfully about the importance, not just is it acceptable, but the importance of making this change to the gate. I think it's absolutely beautiful in the hands of one of the great masters of this kind of work today, operating in the world. It also, to me, recalls at its best, and I would hope to see the details of Castel Vecchio in Verona with the great Carlo Scarpa, who in the 50s thought that this was an appropriate way to introduce very subtly the idea of a new use behind an old facade. So I think this is one of the most beautiful elements of the whole idea of the scheme is this gate. I was interested in Commissioner Goldblum's idea that it shouldn't extend past the doorway itself. That's an interesting thought. That might be a good critique. So I'll leave it at that, but I was really profoundly interested and happy to see this important building updated in this subtle but powerful way.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Okay, I will start with the donut, and I can accept what my fellow commissioners said. It's appropriate. The only issue for me is, the windows on either side. If there was some way of being a good neighbor somehow, but I don't know how you could do that. So, the front elevation, I find not being green appropriate. I find it really beautiful the way it's just kind of semi-courtyard, a tiny courtyard in an urban fabric. I find the bench appropriate. I find the sign, the sign box, the mailbox, too high. It's almost 6 feet tall, and there are 3 elements in this: the mailbox, the bench, and the doorway, and the transom. And that element draws a lot of attention to itself. I do agree that the doorway gate being a grid works well. It's a transom would be fine too. It would be fine. I do think that the canopy should be smaller, not as dominant. It should fit into the area of the doorway, and that way it'll be subordinate to the whole kind of open area, and have appropriate play for its own. And those are my comments.
Okay. Do you have thoughts on the window, the new steel window?
I do think that it's much better to make it out of wood. Yes,
okay,
replicate one on the second floor.
Okay, Commissioner Gustafson.
Starting in the back, I think I agree with everyone else. There are no issues for me whatsoever in terms of the massing and the intrusion in the donut, et cetera. I do not mind the removal of the green in the front. I suppose I might feel differently if we were on a side street, but we are right there. Even though it is a continuous green band along there, it remains Fifth Avenue. The idea of an institutional building on Fifth Avenue looking a little different than the rest is perfectly fine. The changes to the front areaway, I'm okay with. The bench, I think, is really actually very subtle and terrific. And I don't have a problem with the signboard either. The window, I agree with Commissioner Goldblum's comments. It seems to be neither fish nor fowl. And as far as the gate and the canopy are concerned, I agree with the comment about the width of the canopy. There's something that does draw attention to itself. It does sort of step away from the relationship to it. It does not have a relationship to the context and interrupts the rest of the view of that doorway. But I'm okay with the gate itself and the materials. I think that's everything.
I think that is, yep. Okay, Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Yes, thanks. So I think I am in agreement with others about the rear condition, and that that the changes to it are appropriate, though I would say that the side walls of the upper level could be a non-solid material or as solid, and not just, and so I might want to see it more transparent or some other sort of slightly less permanent kind of material. I don't know if it relates to a kind of pergola language, I'm not sure, but that would be the only area that I think there could be a change to, rather than this kind of solid sidewalls. On the front, I find this just fascinating, and I've been struggling with it to see if really there is a need to retain the transom, retain the historic fabric, retain a kind of historic language, and in another context, I would say yes, and I don't want for us to refer, or I will try not to refer to the new use, because we're trying not to opine on use. So I'm just trying to ask if the building itself needs to retain the historic fabric or image. And strangely, there is something, firstly, there's a bit of an irony about all of the tenants in the adjacent building, concerned about retention of material, historic, when in fact, this is the case in all situations in New York, and why this preservation thing is ironic fundamentally anyway. But that their own building or adjacent or the opposite building displaced the twin for this, the twin of this townhouse, and so it was entirely made to go away in order for the new residential building to exist. So, and then the fact that the building that remains, that the townhouse that remains, is so unquestionably sort of, it speaks for the history of that size and scale and the townhouse ness of the building, its residential original use, even as a speculative building. So I think that because of that, the new contemporary gate design does not take away from the sort of the nature of this building, and the fact that it reminds you, that it continues to tell you the story of what once was here. And so when I ask myself the question of whether or not the historic fabric or image needs to be retained, I have to say no, not necessarily. There is enough about the building, again, its size, the way that it's kind of squeezed and recalls that that is enough. And so the new gate does not, the new gate in its contemporary style does not take away from that. So I think it's actually very interesting, and I can support it, think it is appropriate, the steel square gate. And I feel sort of the same way about the canopy as well. And frankly, I actually, even though it is not as interesting from a design perspective, feel the same way about the steel window. I would say that and I also support the decision here to not extend the green elements in front of this building. I think that the only piece that I would object to and think is inappropriate is actually the signboard. I think all of it should go away and either live inside of the kind of this new zone on the sort of interior past the gate, especially if there is this intention, and I can't quite tell if it's just a sort of gestural or if it's actual, for the gate to be in an open position during the day or in some big part of the day or time. I just think that the whole signboard, its orientation, its size, it's sort of the way that it breaks up the kind of the passage. It's unusual in terms of signboards on Fifth Avenue, even if it's 90 degrees flipped. So I find that it's inappropriate.
Okay. And even though pre-designation, the Goethe Institute had a vertically perpendicular signboard.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah. First, I very much agree with Commissioner Goldblum and other commissioners about the rear. I think it's very successful. And obviously, if they can do something to accommodate to people on the side, which is not within our preview, that might be a good for them, for the neighborhoods. The window, I think, I agree with others that I think a wood window is preferable here. I am fine with the bench. I think the bench and the limestone pavement is also fine. I don't feel the need for any greenery in this situation. I looked originally at the door and thought I would like to see something referencing, 1906 plans, design, but I am persuaded, both by other commissioners and also by the elegance of the modern design, that the whole composition, I think, works very well and makes a different kind of statement, but one which I think does not really detract from the building. And so I can approve it as, yes, possibly the canopy could be reduced. I think that that's an architectural decision about the proportions of the doorway, the canopy, and the other elements and because it's not really interfering with your perception of the, I think of the details over the door. But if it could be reduced without upsetting the appropriate proportions, I think that's fine. I think this is a very transparent, modern design that's totally appropriate to the cultural use. And I personally also find the signboard, while unusual, to be well designed and to fit in with the overall, modern approach to the building. So I'm okay with that as well.
Okay, all right. So I think that there are a lot of positive feelings toward this approach for this new use for this building. And I think we can actually get very close to making a motion today. I think that, everybody is comfortable and finds the rear yard additions to be appropriate on this particular building and within the context of this block, given the history of significantly large additions on other townhouses and their replacement as well with larger buildings throughout this district. And then I think that the majority of commissioners would like to see some reduction in the canopy and for the window to be restudied to either return to the historic configuration and material or to relate to the gate. And Commissioner Goldblum, you let us off. You had concerns about the lack of green space, and I think everybody else is comfortable without green space being integrated. Would you be comfortable if we made a motion to approve it with the 2 modifications on the window and the canopy, and then just ask them to explore the idea of integrating green space with the staff?
Sure.
Would that be okay? Okay,
yes.
So I think if we can do that, we can make a motion to approve with modifications today. So would you make that motion, Michael?
Sure. Regarding 1014 Fifth Avenue, Metropolitan Museum Historic District, the Beaux Arts style townhouse designed by Welch, Smith, and Probot in 1906-1907. The application is to alter the areaway, modify the windows and doors, and enlarge rear yard addition. I note that the building scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Metropolitan Museum Historic District, and I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the work will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features, that there is precedent for stone paving in display cases at areaways at institutional buildings of this age and style within the historic district, that installing limestone pavers within the footprint of the historic areaway to align with the existing scoring joints at the adjacent sidewalk will help delineate the areaway from the public sidewalk without obscuring any architectural features or detracting from the standard sidewalk paving on the block. It's simply designed freestanding limestone bench and metal and glass kiosk will not impact or obscure any architectural features of the primary facade. That the bench and kiosk will be installed through the new limestone pavers and their installation is easily reversible. That the canopies and decorative metalwork are typical architectural features found at entrances of cultural institutions within this historic district. That the existing door, window, and decorative ironwork to be removed at the first floor of the Fifth Avenue facade are not original to the building. That the proposed fixed multi-light window at the first floor relates to the configuration of the historic windows at the upper floors of the facade. That the proposed enlargement of the rear extension will not be visible from any public thoroughfare. That the proposed addition will be constructed on top of an existing rear yard addition and will not project any farther into the central green space than the existing structure, and will therefore not compromise the historic character of the center of the block. That this is the only remaining building of its original row, and much larger apartment buildings have been constructed to either side. Therefore, the construction of a full-height addition will not further alter its historic relationship to the row, and that the work will not detract from the architectural or historic character of the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. However, I recommend that the applicant work with the staff to first reduce the width of the entry canopy to align with the gate below. 2, to explore the use of wood instead of steel in a historic restoration approach to the first floor window. And 3, that they explore the possibility of adding green in some manner to the front yard area.
All right, and if
that doesn't work out, that's okay too.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, and Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, so that's approved with those few modifications. Please continue to work with the staff. And we are a little over an hour behind schedule now, so we will break for lunch at this time and come back at 1:05, and we will resume the public hearing with public hearing item number 2, 65 Spring Street at 1:05. So we'll ask all members of the public to voluntarily exit the meeting at this time so that you don't have technical difficulties returning. And we will see you in a half an hour. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you very much.